after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Archbishop Desmond Tutu's Rainbow Nation is, well, it's just not really happening. Some critics blame this on the TRC's failure to get the perpetrators of apartheid atrocities to account for their actions. Others believe that continued racial and economic inequalities are to blame. But what comes first here? I mean, what impact is government's moves to expropriate land without compensation having on existing racial tensions in the country? President Cyril Ramaphosa says land expropriation is key.
Is therefore part and parcel of the whole project of nation building. It is key to furthering reconciliation in our country and is central to eliminating inequality in society. Far from being a measure that will fuel tensions or set race relations back or fuel tension between the races in our country, accelerated land reform has the potential to improve goodwill between the people of our country.
Joining us to discuss these issues are Marjorie Jobson of the Kulumani Support Group and political analyst Lebohang Pheko. Thank you very much for joining us. Lebohang Pheko, is that the solution? Cyril Ramaphosa's promise for land expropriation, is that going to heal and resolve all evils?
So, I mean, it depends really what we're trying to resolve. The one question that I think we need to ask ourselves is what reconciliation actually means. And reconciliation makes the assumption that we're coming from a place of common ground and that this is restoring that broken or fractured ground. And of course, that's not the case in this country. You know, we're coming from a particular colonial history where there was a, oppressor and the oppressed, the dispossessed and the dispossessors. So I think we need to be a bit more honest about where we're coming from. And secondly, whether reconciliation is really not a part of a project of trying to restore the unfinished liberation project, and the idea that, in fact, restitution is what we should be looking at. Restitution of land, yes, restitution of the economy into African hands, restitution of power and politics, and restitution of voice. And there's an argument which says that really since 1994 we've been at the behest of a form of minority rule, so that, it's a small capital minority, largely white minority, and largely external minority, international interests, which, capital interest, global interest, financial interest, which seem to take precedence over national sovereignty and the interest of trying to restore and to live out a real liberation agenda. So I think it's a lot more complex.
I suppose it's been allowed to proliferate because you've had a leadership that has had its own interests, so it probably hasn't had the interests of its people at heart.
Well, yeah, I think the compromises begin at CODESA, and they've just continued to escalate and to snowball. So I think for now, and indeed, when we talk about land restitution, it's a conversation that really should have taken place at the outset in 1994, and it smacks of slightly of political disingenuousness now.
All right. Marjorie, your thoughts? I mean, you work with many victims who still haven't got what they were promised, haven't got what they need to help them move on. I mean, what do you think we are celebrating today, and what are we reconciling today?
So, Jane, our slogan has always been no reconciliation without redress. And I completely concur with Lebohang that we're looking at meaningful restitution of people. The people that we work with are the direct activists who carried all the harms in the struggle, internal struggle for freedom and justice, as it was called. And we're very, very grateful that after so many years of fighting for this, for equal justice for all people who had the same things happen to them. I mean, the TRC appallingly began a process that didn't see through to the end. And
why was that? I mean, should there have been pressure from, and where should it have come from?
I mean, there was enormous pressure. I mean, we had...
No, but to continue the process. I mean, why do you think it just fell apart?
I mean, the political questions were, well, we don't think we've got enough money, but in the meantime, we're going to pay back the apartheid debt. Yeah. And that was the first thing we said, is you don't pay the apartheid illegitimate debt. Use that for doing this restitution and restoration of people's lives. And we didn't win that battle. It was a very big battle. And then we tried to sue the multinational companies who were complicit in aiding and abetting the atrocities. And that went on. That battle lasted 14 years. We learned a lot in that battle about the political interventions that derail very legitimate struggles. And I mean, so then we got back to. Originally, Kulumani believed that if we can't get everybody recognized, which is the basis of healing, just the simple recognition that this is what happened to you in the struggle, then we need to make sure everybody's included in community reparations. And we realize that the whole plan for community reparations has been a complete aberration because it's been top-down planning of what the state will do in communities, mainly putting up infrastructure for which there are other budgets like municipal infrastructure grants. And so we're very glad that whole program has been sent back to the drawing board, but it's been taken 20 years to force it back onto the drawing board. And now the minister is agreeing that there actually should be some kind of reopening of those processes finally. But it's not clear exactly what they're intending to do.
So do you think that the TRC did more harm than good? Or was the idea behind it excellent, but badly executed, and maybe the wrong players in there?
So it was very much personality-driven. And remember, it also came at the time, Jane, when there was the whole international rebranding of the so-called New South Africa, and the rebranding of South Africa as this.
I mean, it looked good.
It looked fantastic at a distance, as this thing called the Rainbow Nation. And I think it's extremely unfortunate that one person, Bishop Dudu, has coined this, but it's not a reality that's shared and perhaps and understood broadly and experienced broadly. And what exactly does a rainbow mean as well? And I think it's part of that same agenda or the same discourse of airbrushing narratives, airbrushing pain, trying to act as though all is well and that it's really about a race relations and a social relations exercise, rather than really one about restitution, one about political power, one about transferring power, authority, land, and so forth, and really governance from one government to the next, from one regime to the other, from the minority regime to the African-led regime. And I think that in so much of that got lost in the cracks of concessions, of over-appeasement, and of bending over backwards to ensure and assure international interests, market interests, mainly Western interests, and I think the capital interests that still very much have a lot of voice in this country, rather than
show them the picture that everything's fine.
Yes,
the reality.
And we can see from generations that are coming up, children who were not born in 1994, and young people, when they say fees must fall, it illustrates clearly that there is no reconciliation of the economy, that there's an intergenerational legacy of dispossession, and there's a intergenerational legacy of unemployment, of being completely excluded and marginalized in their own country. So this rainbow doesn't really,
Just hold on for a second, we've got a caller. Ndlovu from the Northern Cape. Hello, Ndlovu. What's your question?
Hello.
Good evening. Go ahead, Ndlovu.
Yes, please. I just want to make a comment. I was listening to Ndileka Mandela saying there must be another truth commission or many other truth commissions. It won't help. There was nothing wrong. Reconciliation is a two-way process. If one party is at the table and the other one does not come to the party, it won't help. What is the reason that the other party does not come to the table to reconcile? You can't reconcile alone.
Okay, thanks, Ndlovu. How do you get both sides to work on this and to really do the hard work?
So there are some very interesting things that have been starting up. One has been the top leadership of the NG Kerk, which is the church that endorsed the theology of apartheid, that underpinned apartheid. And we've been in an almost 2-year relationship of slowly bringing people to a table of equality, of real truth-telling, of becoming very vulnerable with each other. And now we are moving into the economic sphere because a lot of people in the NG Kerk have skills, to impart, and relationships with mines, for instance. There's 300,000 hectares of land we're busy looking at that the mines are willing to fund Kulumani groups to farm on. So I mean, we've been very cautious about how we manage the relationship, because restitution is not about charity. It's about real, meaningful exchange between equal human beings around a table where everybody has an equal voice and the power is distributed equally. So, I mean, those are interesting. We're also seeing, we're going off tomorrow to Uppington. There was a terrible bombing in 1996, and the man behind that bombing has asked now to please meet with his victims. I think he's been in jail 22 years. And he came from a racist right-wing movement.
So I'm going to jump in here. I mean, that's obviously key to change in South Africa, is dealing with it at grassroots level, right? I mean, we've done the pictures and the media and everything's going to be okay, but I think it's those relationships that will make a difference, isn't it? That I see you for you, you see me for me, and we can try and understand each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one part of it, but I think understanding is not enough to bring about structural change, and I think that's very important. And in social relations,
where does that come from? Because our politicians aren't really speaking the speak, are they?
They're not at all, but I mean, we need to. They need to be able to use the instruments that are at their disposal, Jane. I mean, the one is that the economic redistribution mechanisms which have been put in place, BEE for what it is and isn't worth. The idea of affirmative action, the idea of set-asides of government procurement to ensure that black businesses come up as well. And I think that they can be far more deliberate and intentional ways of redistributing voice, of redistributing life opportunities, of redistributing power, and redistributing economic benefits in a way that's proportional to the numbers in this country. And I think that there's too much of an apologetic stance that seems to be the trend in this country. And people across the world, other dispossessed people, are quite puzzled that a country which has a numeric majority of indigenous African people, I mean, people in Australia, the Maoris in New Zealand, are quite puzzled that with a numeric majority, we behave as though we are a minority. And in fact, in many respects, we are a minority in terms of influence and power, and that's extremely problematic.
Okay. We've got Musi from Benoni on the line. Go ahead, Musi.
Yes, good evening. How are you?
Evening. Well, thank you. What's your question, Musi?
My question is one. There's no, after 24 years in democracy, we did not have any reconciliation in South Africa. Only what we have is rhetoric by the politicians when they're not telling the truth. When you talk about the Jews, the Holocaust, it always, more than 100 years, the Holocaust been spoken to, but they have redressed themselves as minority. South Africa majority was just a football of the politicians when they're just kicking us and they're not telling the truth about redress. You can see the separation between the blacks and the whites. In Pretoria yesterday, the whites were in Pretoria, there by the monument, and the blacks were in Mthatha. More than people that were sitting there. Where the reconciliation is always, other people are just crying. What is that? There's no similarity on these things. It's just a rhetoric.
Okay, Mercy. Brief response, because we run out of time, please.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to go back to some experiences in the Eastern Cape where people felt very dismayed with the management of the TRC because they said having such a strong Christian ethos, it neglected the fact that they had their own indigenous religion that had enabled them to survive some of the worst atrocities in 100 years of colonial expansion and military operations in the Eastern Cape. And so we actually went about finding the children of the missionaries to start real conversations across the divide. And the shocking thing was that the people in the movement we were working with in Kolo Kantu could not believe the real stories of what the colonialists had done, because they said it's not humanly possible to be that horrendously inhumane to other people.
Yeah. Well, I think that was the thing during apartheid. It was just sort of that blanket of information, they're preventing people from getting it. I'm going to have to cut you off there.
Okay, but I think those conversations are needed everywhere.
And it's good to hear that they are actually happening. Marjorie Jobson and Lebogang Pheko, thank you very much.